There are a number of title fights being booked in the UFC where the next top contenders are battling it out to earn their shot at UFC Gold. For this video, I will be talking about 10 next title challenges in the UFC. Number 10. Stipe Miocic is the current UFC heavyweight champion who last defeated Junior Dos Santos by TKO in the first round at UFC 211. The next likely challenger for Stipe Miocic will be the winner of Fabricio Werdum vs Alistair Overeem, who will face each other at UFC 213. Both fighters have lost to Stipe Miocic but have won a fight since then. I believe the winner of this fight will likely get their rematch against Stipe Miocic at the end of the year. Number 9. Daniel Cormier is the current UFC light heavyweight champion who last defeated Anthony Johnson by a rear naked choke in the second round at UFC 210. He is scheduled to face the man who gave him his first loss, John Jones, at UFC 214. The next likely challenger for whoever wins the fight will likely be Jimmy Manuwa. Jimmy Manuwa would have got his title shot if John Jones wanted a warm-up fight. He has finished his last two fights with his signature left hook, knocking his opponents out cold. Jimmy Manuwa last defeated Corey Anderson by knockout in the first round at UFC Final 107. Number 8. Michael Bisping is the current UFC middleweight champion who last defeated Dan Henderson by a unanimous decision at UFC 204. He is currently recovering from a knee injury which has led the UFC to book an interim title fight between Yoel Romero and Robert Whittaker. Whoever wins the interim title fight will fight Michael Bisping at the end of the year in a title unification bout. The next likely challenger would be either Gegard Mousasi if he re-signs with the UFC or Luke Rockhold. Luke Rockhold recently said that the UFC offered him Gegard Mousasi as a potential next opponent. If this fight does happen, the winner of this fight will likely get the next title shot. Number 7. Tyron Woodley is the current UFC welterweight champion who last defeated Stephen Thompson by a majority decision at UFC 209. He will likely defend his UFC welterweight title against Damian Maia next at a later date. The next likely challenger for whoever is holding the title will likely be George St. Pierre. GSP was supposed to fight Michael Bisping in the summer, but the fight never materialized. The UFC president Dana White recently mentioned that GSP will get the next title shot in his UFC return. Number 6. Conor McGregor is the current UFC lightweight champion who last defeated Eddie Alvarez by TKO in the second round at UFC 205. With Conor McGregor looking likely to face Floyd Mayweather in a potential boxing match, and with no clear number 1 contender in the UFC lightweight division, I believe the UFC will rebook the fight between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson for the interim UFC lightweight title, and whoever wins the interim title will likely face Conor McGregor in a title unification bout at a later date. Number 5. Jose Aldo is the current UFC featherweight champion who last defeated Frankie Edgar by a unanimous decision at UFC 200. He is currently scheduled to face interim UFC featherweight champion Max Holloway in a title unification bout at UFC 212. The next likely challenger for the UFC featherweight title will either be Frankie Edgar or Cub Swanson. Frankie Edgar last defeated Yair Rodriguez by TKO doctor stoppage in the second round at UFC 211. Cub Swanson last defeated Artem Lobov by a unanimous decision at UFC Final 108. I believe if Jose Aldo successfully defends his title, he will likely face Cub Swanson, as he only recently defeated Frankie Edgar, and if Max Holloway wins, he will likely defend his title against Frankie Edgar, as he already has a victory over Cub Swanson a couple of years ago. Number 4. Cody Garbrandt is the current UFC bantamweight champion who last defeated Dominic Cruz by a unanimous decision. He is currently injured and is recovering from a back injury. When he comes back, he will likely defend his UFC bantamweight title against TJ Dillashaw at a later date. The next challenger for the UFC bantamweight title will likely be Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz had defeated majority of the top bantamweights and was the long reigning champion in the WEC. I believe the UFC will grant Dominic Cruz a title shot against the winner of Cody Garbrandt vs TJ Dillashaw. Number 3. Demetrius Johnson is the current UFC flyweight champion who last defeated Wilson Hayes by submission via an armbar in the third round at UFC on Fox 24. I believe as of right now, Ray Borg will likely get the next title shot against Demetrius Johnson later this year. The next challenger for the UFC flyweight title will likely be the winner of Sergio Pettis vs Brandon Moreno at UFC Final 114. Sergio Pettis last defeated John Moraga by a unanimous decision at UFC Final 103. Brandon Moreno last defeated Dustin Ortiz by submission via a rear naked choke in the second round at UFC Final 108. Number 2. Amanda Nunes is the current UFC bantamweight champion who last defeated Ronda Rousey by TKO in the first round at UFC 207. She is scheduled to defend her title against Valentina Shevchenko at UFC 213. The next likely challenger for the UFC women's bantamweight title will either be Sarah McMahon or Raquel Pennington. Sarah McMahon last defeated Gina Mazzani by submission via an arm triangle choke in the first round at UFC Final 105. Raquel Pennington last defeated former champion Miesha Tate by a unanimous decision at UFC 205. Number 1. Joanna Jędrzejczyk is the current UFC strawweight champion who last defeated Jessica Andrade by a unanimous decision at UFC 211. She will likely defend her title against Rosnama Nunes at the end of the year. The next likely challenger for the UFC women's strawweight title will likely be the winner of Claudia Gadelha versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz, who will face each other at UFC 212. Both fighters have fought for the title and will likely get the next title shot. Let me know who you guys think will likely challenge for the UFC titles next in the comment section below. Thank you.